What if the scariest monster isn't hiding under your bed, but inside your memories? Pennywise is not just a clown. He's a shape, a whisper, a presence, something ancient and incomprehensible that feeds on something very real: fear. But not just any fear. He's drawn to the kind that lives quietly in the corners of your childhood, the kind you never fully grow out of. This isn't just a horror story. It's a psychological mirror. Why do certain fears stay with us for life? Why does one image, a red balloon, a crooked smile, the sound of laughter in the dark, have the power to paralyze? In this video, we're diving into the mind behind the makeup and exploring how Pennywise is not a creature from another world, but a reflection of our deepest vulnerabilities. Because in Derry, and maybe even in our own lives, fear doesn't fade. It evolves. Long before the town of Derry had paved streets or painted houses, something else was already there, lurking. According to the mythos of Stephen King's universe, Pennywise, or it, is not a supernatural being in the traditional sense. It's an ancient entity, a cosmic force older than time as we know it, that arrived on Earth in a meteor strike, buried beneath what would later become Derry. But this isn't just a backstory. It's a metaphor. Pennywise is not merely in Derry. Pennywise is Derry. The creature didn't just choose the town randomly. It became symbiotic with it. The town hides secrets, ignores suffering, and looks away when things go wrong. And that's exactly how Pennywise survives. Not just through fear, but through collective denial. The more the town refuses to see the truth, the stronger he becomes. And what does he choose to appear as? A clown. The clown is the perfect paradox. Designed to entertain, yet deeply unsettling to many, especially children. There's even a term for it: coulrophobia, the irrational fear of clowns. But is it irrational? When a face is frozen in a smile, it hides intention. It's unreadable. The same way a child might look up at a parent or teacher and not know what's coming next, kindness or cruelty. Pennywise wears that mask permanently. In psychological terms, Pennywise represents unresolved fear. Specifically, the kind formed in early childhood, moments of confusion, loneliness, helplessness. He doesn't create those emotions. He detects them. He preys not on the physical body, but on the psychological wounds we try to forget. The town of Derry is a stage for this psychological theater. Every 27 years, something awakens. Disappearances happen. People feel something is wrong, but no one talks about it. This silence is key, because trauma, when silenced, doesn't go away. It hides, it mutates, and eventually, it comes back. Pennywise takes many forms: a leper, a twisted painting, a giant spider, but the clown remains his most iconic. Why? Because the clown mocks innocence. It pretends to be safe, even fun. But its unpredictability makes it dangerous. It laughs while hurting. It plays while hunting. Neuroscience suggests that the brain's amygdala, the fear center, is most reactive during childhood. That means what scares us when we're young, if not resolved, can stay embedded for life. Pennywise exploits that. He appears not just to scare, but to remind his victims of what they never truly healed. And yet, despite his power, there's something he cannot fake: real connection. The Losers Club, the group of children who stand against him, begin to understand that fear only thrives in isolation. When shared, when spoken, when faced together, fear begins to lose its power. But there was something no one saw coming. The clown wasn't just a monster. He was a symptom of something darker, something human. What breaks a child isn't always what happens. Sometimes it's what no one sees. Pennywise doesn't arrive with thunder or fire. He slips in quietly, through fear left unspoken, through pain left unresolved. And in Derry, there's plenty of both. Every child in the Losers Club carries a wound. Not a physical one, but something invisible, psychological. Bill Denbrough is haunted by the loss of his younger brother, not just because he's gone, but because Bill blames himself. Beverly Marsh lives under the weight of fear and control at home, forced to grow up too fast. Mike Hanlon is surrounded by the silent burden of racial isolation, while Ben Hanscom's loneliness eats at his sense of worth. Each of them walks through the world wearing a mask, not unlike Pennywise, smiling when they're supposed to, but screaming inside. This is where Pennywise strikes. He doesn't invent fear. He activates it. He's not just a creature from the shadows. He is the shadow of trauma, of shame, of what was never said. Psychologically, this is known as emotional repression, when the mind pushes down difficult feelings to protect itself. It works for a while, but these feelings don't disappear. They resurface in different forms: anxiety, isolation, nightmares. Pennywise is the embodiment of those suppressed emotions. He reflects what each child fears most, not because he reads minds, but because unresolved trauma always finds a way to leak out. Let's look at an example. Eddie Kasbrock. Eddie's overprotective mother constantly convinces him that he's weak, sick, fragile. Over time, Eddie internalizes this belief. His greatest fear isn't illness, it's dependency. It's the idea that he's incapable of surviving alone. So what does Pennywise become for him? A grotesque, diseased figure, a walking contamination. It's not just horrifying, it's personal. This personalized horror is the core of Pennywise's method. He tailors fear. He targets the softest parts of the psyche. And for children, those parts are still forming. The brain during early development is like wet cement. Anything that lands on it leaves a permanent mark. Trauma during this stage doesn't just leave memories. It shapes identity. But there's another layer: Derry itself. The town is complicit. Adults look away when things happen. They pretend not to see. This silent complicity reinforces the children's belief that they are alone, that no one will come to help. And once they believe that, Pennywise wins. This is a cycle known in psychology as learned helplessness, when repeated experiences of powerlessness train the brain to give up. The child stops asking for help, stops speaking, stops believing anything can change. And that's the rupture. Not the first time Pennywise appears, not the first scream, but the moment each child starts believing that fear is stronger than them, that no one will save them, that nothing will get better. And from that moment on, the clown no longer needs to chase them. They begin walking toward him. This transformation is silent but devastating, because fear, once it takes root, becomes more than an emotion. It becomes a worldview. And Pennywise thrives in that worldview, one where the child is isolated, voiceless, and convinced that the nightmare is permanent. And yet, even in the darkest moments, a spark remains. A quiet resistance. A flicker of memory that says, you're not alone. Because even fear, when named, begins to lose its power. But for now, Derry's quiet, too quiet, and it's in that silence that everything begins to fall apart. Fear doesn't grow wild. It is planted, watered, nurtured, and sometimes weaponized. At this point in the story, Pennywise is no longer just a shadow on the wall or a face in the storm drain. He becomes something else entirely, an architecture of fear. His attacks aren't random, and his form isn't chosen by chance. Each appearance is deliberate, strategic, precise. This is no mindless creature. This is intelligence. And worse, it's intimate. The deeper we go into Pennywise's behavior, the more we realize he doesn't simply react to fear. He engineers it. He studies it. He turns the human mind into a maze, then waits silently at the center. Let's break this down. In neuroscience, there's a concept known as pattern recognition bias. The brain is wired to seek patterns, to predict danger, to anticipate pain. Pennywise exploits this function like a maestro. Once a child has seen him once, the brain begins expecting him everywhere. A red balloon in the street, a flicker of light in the basement, a laugh echoing in a pipe, everything becomes a possible threat. And that's when Pennywise truly takes control, when fear no longer needs his presence to grow, when the mind does the work for him. This is structured darkness, a system of fear so efficient that it sustains itself. Pennywise becomes an idea, not just a figure. And ideas are harder to destroy. But there's another transformation happening in parallel inside the children. As they're pulled deeper into this cycle of fear, they begin to change. Their behavior shifts, their perceptions distort. They grow quiet, defensive, distrustful. Fear isolates. And isolation makes them easier targets. This is how Pennywise evolves. Not by growing stronger, but by making his victims weaker from within. And let's not forget, Pennywise has been doing this for centuries. Over time, he's perfected the art of psychological warfare. He knows which images stick, which voices echo longest, which memories will rot from the inside out. He knows that true fear isn't fast or loud. It's slow, creeping, familiar. Think of how he appears. A decaying painting that once brought comfort. A twisted version of a loved one. A laugh that feels too close to home. These aren't just jump scares. They're deeply personal, targeted, tailored. Pennywise weaponizes the known. Because what we already trust, when corrupted, hurts far more than something alien ever could. This method mirrors what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the tension that occurs when something familiar becomes unsafe. That tension creates confusion, and confusion is where fear multiplies. Derry itself falls under this spell. The town becomes part of Pennywise's structure. The adults don't just ignore the danger, they subconsciously accept it. Their silence, their numbness, their indifference, it all contributes to the ecosystem of fear. It's almost as if Pennywise has infected the town's very foundation. He doesn't need chains. He has culture. He has silence. He has routine. And perhaps the most terrifying part, Pennywise doesn't have to destroy his victims to win. He only has to convince them that they were never safe to begin with. But beneath all the terror, beneath the tricks and the teeth, something darker still remains. Because what if Pennywise isn't the only monster in Derry? What if he's simply the reflection of another, more human kind of darkness? What if he's not the origin, but the result? The moment fear becomes truth is the moment it stops needing a face. Up until now, fear was still a reaction, a shiver, a heartbeat, a voice in the dark. But eventually, something shifts. The fear becomes internalized. It becomes belief. This is the point of no return, when Pennywise no longer needs to chase his victims, because they've already surrendered. It's not a dramatic fall. It's subtle, a slow erosion of hope. The losers begin to feel it, in their homes, in their streets, in the silence of their parents' eyes. The world that once felt like theirs becomes hostile, unpredictable, unkind. And Pennywise, without lifting a finger, becomes their only constant. But here's the cruel brilliance. He doesn't isolate them physically. He isolates them psychologically. Fear becomes their lens. Every choice, every thought, every interaction is filtered through anxiety. What was once a bike ride becomes a risk. A basement becomes a battlefield. A whisper becomes a weapon. And slowly, the world starts to reflect what they fear most. This psychological shift is explained by schema theory, the idea that our past experiences shape the mental frameworks through which we interpret reality. When those frameworks are built on trauma, the brain begins to expect pain, to anticipate betrayal, to fear connection. It's not just paranoia. It's learned survival. And that's when Pennywise wins. Not when he terrifies, but when he rewrites how they see the world. Each member of the Losers Club starts to internalize the chaos. Bill carries guilt so heavy it bends his sense of worth. Beverly mistrusts anyone who shows kindness, fearing the price. Ben withdraws further into loneliness, convinced he's invisible. These aren't just character traits. They're symptoms of something deeper. Belief systems shaped by fear. And as fear solidifies into belief, the moral lines begin to blur. Pennywise no longer needs to appear in grotesque form. He can whisper through doubt, linger in shame, suggest thoughts that make the losers question each other and themselves. This is emotional disintegration, not loud or violent, but quiet and lasting. But here's the most disturbing part. At this point, Pennywise isn't just exploiting fear. He's becoming logical. To the children, the idea of confronting him becomes absurd. Why fight what always wins? Why trust a world that never listens? This is existential collapse, the breakdown of the fundamental belief that things can get better. And when that happens, morality becomes relative. What would you do to feel safe again? Would you run? Would you hide? Would you hurt someone to protect yourself? Would you convince yourself that fear is normal, just to feel in control? These are the questions Pennywise plants like seeds. He doesn't demand obedience. He waits for the moment they choose it on their own. Because once fear becomes a lifestyle, the clown doesn't need to wear a mask anymore. He's already inside. This is the tragedy of Derry. Not that an ancient entity lives beneath it, but that the people above learn to live with it. And when that becomes the norm, when fear becomes familiar, you stop asking questions. You stop resisting. You start to wonder, what if Pennywise isn't wrong? What if fear really is safer than hope? It wasn't chaos. It was design. A mind made of fear, thinking clearly. To call Pennywise mad would be a mistake. What he does is not random. His appearances aren't sloppy. His methods aren't messy. In fact, when we step back and look at the full picture, what emerges isn't insanity, but a system, a terrifyingly effective one. Let's start with the foundation. Pennywise doesn't just scare his victims, he studies them. He identifies their core emotional wounds, maps their coping mechanisms, and waits for the precise moment when they're most vulnerable. That's not supernatural horror. That's clinical. In psychology, this aligns with what's called targeted fear conditioning, the ability to associate specific, personal stimuli with intense fear responses. And once that association is formed, it sticks. It's part of the brain's survival instinct. Pennywise uses this instinct against the children, turning their own biology into a prison. He doesn't just understand fear. He understands the neurology of fear. Let's break it down. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, responds 80% faster than our logical thinking. That means by the time a child realizes they're afraid, their body is already reacting, heart racing, vision narrowing, breathing shallow. Pennywise exploits this timing gap. He doesn't give his victims time to think. He overwhelms the system. But here's where it gets darker. Modern neuroscience shows that repeated exposure to terror, especially in childhood, changes brain structure. It reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, where we reason, and strengthens pathways in the limbic system, where we react. In short, fear becomes the default. This is what happens in Derry. Year after year, generation after generation, fear is passed down, not just through events, but through culture, through silence, through avoidance, through parents who don't talk about what happened, because they, too, were shaped by it. Pennywise doesn't need to exist in every moment. He only needs to exist in the pattern. And this pattern extends beyond fiction. In real-world psychology, we see echoes of this in the concept of intergenerational trauma. When pain isn't healed, it spreads. What Pennywise represents is more than just a monster. He's the embodiment of unprocessed fear, the kind that's buried, ignored, dismissed, until it returns in another form. In this light, it becomes something terrifyingly human. Think about the Losers Club. Each of them encounters Pennywise alone at first, not because they are physically isolated, but because their trauma has already isolated them emotionally. That's the brilliance of his design. He doesn't create fear. He detects it. Like a predator following heat, he finds the cracks in the mind. And if we look at his behavior through the lens of behavioral psychology, another disturbing truth surfaces. Pennywise doesn't kill to feed. He terrorizes to feed. The suffering is the point. This is consistent with dopaminergic reinforcement theory, the idea that some brains are wired to pursue emotional intensity. If Pennywise is conscious, if he is intelligent, and all evidence says he is, then perhaps he doesn't just feed on fear. He's addicted to it. Not chaos, not madness, craving. And when fear becomes currency, the destruction isn't reckless. It's calculated, surgical, intentional. The most chilling realization? Pennywise doesn't represent something foreign. He represents what the human mind already knows, but refuses to accept. That the scariest thing isn't a monster in the dark. It's the idea that fear itself might make sense. That fear, when fed, grows intelligent, efficient, predictable. And once it learns how to win, it doesn't need force. It just needs time. Because eventually, even in the real world, people stop resisting what they fear and start cooperating with it. You can defeat a creature. You can outrun a nightmare. But how do you erase a memory? When Pennywise disappears, the world doesn't magically go back to normal. The town of Derry doesn't throw a celebration. There are no parades, no monuments, no stories passed down with pride. Instead, everything fades. The people forget. The events blur. Even the losers, those who fought him, feel the past slip away like fog in sunlight. But what does that say? It suggests that Pennywise was never just a thing to be defeated. He was a cycle, and cycles don't die easily, especially when no one is willing to name them. In psychology, this is known as repression. When trauma is too overwhelming to face, the mind pushes it down, hides it, not out of weakness, but out of survival. And Derry becomes a symbol of this, a town that survived horror not by healing it, but by forgetting it. The forgetting isn't the same as defeating, because unprocessed fear doesn't vanish, it mutates. It leaks into behavior, into culture, into silence. And that's Pennywise's true legacy. Not his teeth, not his claws, but the systems of avoidance he leaves behind. The fear of speaking up. The fear of being different. The fear of looking too closely at what's wrong. These aren't fictional horrors. They're real. They live in households, in institutions, in quiet moments when no one wants to talk about the thing that's always been there. And so Pennywise becomes a metaphor, a symbol not of the supernatural, but of unchecked fear. He is the personification of every trauma that was laughed off, every secret that was buried, every pain that was never validated. He lives in the places where no one is looking. He grows in the spaces where people pretend everything is fine. And what about the losers? They grow up, they move on, but something inside them remains fractured. Even when they forget the details, the emotions stick. The guilt, the doubt, the fear of not being believed, of not being safe. This mirrors what trauma therapists call emotional imprinting, the idea that early emotional experiences create lasting templates for how we understand the world. And once fear is part of that template, it shapes every relationship, every decision, every silence. So maybe the final tragedy isn't that Pennywise hurt them. Maybe it's that his voice never truly left. And yet, There's a kind of hope here, too, because the losers, despite everything, chose to face him. They didn't have to. They could have run, denied, stayed silent like the rest of Derry. But they came together. They confronted the dark. And even if they forgot the battle, their choice remains. That's where real strength lives, not in destroying monsters, but in refusing to become them, because every generation has its Pennywise, its silence, its fear. The question is, will we repeat the pattern, or will we name it? Will we shine a light on it before it grows strong enough to wear a face? Because maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the last.